I got a real glimpse of what the strategy of Kemal Atatürk solidify the secularism of the country. Right? Just imagine that. They're taking pictures. Imagine seeing a lady in a miniskirt, half top, right? In front of a masjid, taking pictures with a message behind her. Right? And you're viewing this. Imagine growing up around this. What is the masjid?
Welcome to another episode of the CaliCast. I'm your host, Gron. I'm joined by my co-host, Sheikh Tariq. We'll jump right into it.
Let's do it.
A few weeks ago, I remember picking you up for vacation.
All right, that's true.
You said you've always wanted to visit Turkey, always wanted to go.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. How'd your experience go?
Yeah, so family and I went to Turkey for 2 weeks in Istanbul. It's all in Istanbul. And, you know, it's been something we've been wanting to do for about 4 years now, and never worked out until this year. Alhamdulillah, in fact, it might have been 5 years, but nonetheless, it worked out. And you know, there's a lot of hype around Turkey, right? And just Turkey and what it has to offer. And I mean, you see it all over the place. Muslims taking trips to Turkey, and I think there's a reason for that, and that is because that's the last. That's the area where the last Muslim, independent, autonomous Muslim government was, right? And this is the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire is really one of the most powerful empires in human history. So, some pretty grand stuff over there, and historically speaking. And you also add the nostalgia part. The Muslims are very, very nostalgic for a more stable political situation in that region, stable and autonomous political situation in that region. So I think that attracts a lot of people. And of course, you know, Turkey is doing a phenomenal job when it comes to tourism, the tourist sector. So you have people from across the world. You know, Istanbul is one of the most visited cities in the world. Even it's in competition with places like Paris and whatnot.
Really?
Yeah, and I think one year was actually it ranked higher than Paris, which is really shocking. But
because I heard Paris is a dump nowadays. It's dirty, rats everywhere.
I don't know. I never been there. I'm not interested in going. I'm really not interested in Europe besides the UK, really, to be honest. I don't know. I just never found Europe to be very attractive. That's just something personal, right? With the exception of London and Britain. I'd like to visit there. But yeah, so we went there and we did, you know, the standard tourist attractions in Turkey.
It's nice. And how are the people there?
I mean, the thing about it is that the Turkish people take a lot of pride in the Turkish language. And so it's very rare to find someone who speaks a language besides Turkey. And so I couldn't really engage them. And interestingly enough, during this time, I forgot it was before or after, I was reading about the importance of language when it comes to identity, right? And this is very interesting to me, and it should be interesting to any Muslim, because the very first story of Adam, the creation of Adam, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? I mean, you're only 5-6 pages in the Quran by now. The first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the characteristics of Adam, one of the first things is language, right? That Adam spoke. I mean, he's speaking, and he can articulate what he sees and what is around him. He can give specific names to specific entities, and he can memorize this and use it in a way that to communicate his own ideas to other beings, right? At that time was the angels, but of course us between each other. And you know, when you read over this, unless you understand kind of what language is and what it means for the human being, I think you will just skip over a very, very important part of who we are. And so I'm reading this, and you know, one of the things I come across is that we simply cannot develop an identity without another person. So when I am with you and you're with me, whether we realize it or not, whether we're conscious about it or not, I learn a little bit more about myself while I learn about you. I learn a little bit more about myself as I observe you, right? And then, most importantly, when we talk to each other, like we're doing now, right? Me being able to communicate to you what's in my mind plays an integral role for me to understand who I am. Because now not only am I taking my thoughts and trying to manifest it in a way that's understood by other people, when you receive when you listen to me, that gives me an amount of self-approval, right? That I'm interesting enough for you to lend me your ear, right? And then when you respond to it, right? Although now you're speaking, your response will also help form my own identity, help me form my own identity. So, and it's not just language in terms of words, language in terms of facial gestures and body language as well. And so, interestingly, when you look at, for example, minorities in America, especially minorities who have the outer image of coming from, tougher parts of our country, what we call ghettos and whatnot, right? When they walk around society, so if they were to get out of their environment and come to an area like Irvine or whatever, right? A more economically established area of the country, right? And just walk around and they look at how other people are looking at them. A lot of times, these young men and women, all they're seeing from the language of other people are disapproving facial looks, right? And if it's a smile, it's like a lie. I'm just kind of smiling because I think that's polite, but in reality, they can feel that it's just kind of a fake smile. And so when they're surrounded by people who disapprove them and people who lie to them, right, that shapes an amount of their persona. It's going to be very different than someone who's raised receiving expressions of acceptance and expressions of sincerity, right? So these are two very different trajectories in life and formulating identity and whatnot. So, how this goes back to Turkey, when I was trying to engage the people, see, when I went to Turkey, I went there and I told myself, I really want to know the people. I want to understand them. I want to get to know something about my brothers and sisters who aren't Arab, and now I'm in their homeland, right? I'm only accustomed to Muslims in Arabia, Arab Muslims in Arabia, Arab Muslims in America, or American Muslims of other non-Arab ethnicity. So there's some sort of overlap between me and them. Either they're Arab and Muslim like myself, or they're Muslim and American like myself. I haven't dealt with someone who's Muslim, and that's the only overlap. So when I went to Turkey, that's really what I wanted. But I go there and I'm just simply unable to communicate with anyone. And I began to feel, I noticed I'm just there for 2 weeks. But that was enough for me to feel what isolation is. I felt lonely. I felt homesick. But I've never felt isolation. Like I am isolated. There are things barring me from living my life normally. And so, again, although it was 2 weeks, I got a glimpse of how traumatic that can be and how psychologically challenging and emotionally challenging that could be. And so this is probably one of the main lessons I learned in my time in Turkey. I learned a lot, that the importance of communication, not just, I'm talking about socializing, I'm talking about actually identity, right? Knowing the language. And so, I'm really grateful that I had this opportunity, and kind of ironically, I'm grateful that no one spoke English, right? But no doubt it was a little bit challenging and whatnot. And if there were more people I could have engaged with, I could see that it would have been more pleasurable. But nonetheless, the lessons were learned, and that's really the most valuable thing we can take from any travel.
It's good. That's interesting because even from Afghanistan, being Afghan and with Pakistan, we all took, or even my cousins, we took class. Well, they took class. I watched cartoons growing up, so I learned English like that. But they would take classes to formally speak and learn English. So I'm surprised Turkey didn't do that. Usually, every country in the world does that.
They're a country. It's only Turkish,
Only Turkish.
right? And I believe the reason why is that, um, looking at their history, now Turks originally come from Central Asia,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's not technically their ancestral land. So in Central Asia, you had movements go out, Genghis Khan, and you have other under the Khan dynasties that formed, and in Central Asia, they started entering the Muslim world, right? And they became slowly leaders, and they usurped a lot of the political positions, and then they became kind of the political leaders and military leaders of the Muslim world,
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot. And then with time, the Ottoman Empire formed itself, right? So the connection to their land, yeah, it's centuries old, but that's not originally where they're from. So developing a type of relationship to that land would have been fruitless for Kemal Ataturk, who was trying to secularize the land,
Mm-hmm.
because the only relationship the Turks had to that land was Islamic. So when they entered that region, they were already Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they couldn't do what like some people in, let's say, Egypt try and do. Some of these celebrities and whatnot try to revive the pharaoh civilization, right? Because, well, technically speaking, a lot of them who are living there now are ancestors of the pharaohs, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, the descendants of that era. And so Egypt has always had a civilization for as far back as you can think, and that civilization wasn't always Muslim. So Egyptians weren't always Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
and Egypt wasn't always Islamic, right? So
The opposite at one time, in fact, with Musa alayhi salam.
yes, right. So some of these people who, might not like Islam, try to revive a different civilization to try and overtake that civilization.
Mhm.
Hey, we are pharaohs in the times of the pharaohs. This is who we are. This is what we had and whatnot. Can't really do that with Turkey, right?
Mhm.
Or the Turks living in Turkey. So that kind of goes out of the waters. Number two, the Turkish people, right? As a Turkish kind of thing, there's a lot of subgroups, right? And these groups and tribes there's a lot of friction between them, animosity between them. And so a kind of Turkish identity may not have been the most fruitful choice. What was unique, right? What was unique to the Turks is the language. So it seems like Ataturk, in order to change the way Turks view themselves, they chose something that is unique to them, and that is their language. And so when you look at the Turkish language, how many other countries in the world speak Turkish?
0.
I don't know, right?
Oh,
But it's not like English.
naturally, yeah.
It's not like English where you have dozens, several countries. It's not like Spanish where I believe there's like 28 countries or so that speak Spanish. It's not like the Russian language or Slavic or whatever it is, where it's Russia and then you have some of the
Dagestan,
Eastern,
Chechnya,
right?
yeah.
Some of the Eastern European countries that speak Slavic and whatnot. So it's kind of unique to them. And so perhaps his strategy was, let us destroy the Islamic identity of Turks and replace it with the language. And so, when I was leaving Turkey, I was at the check-in, and, for those of you who travel international coming back to America, you know that at the gate, after you go through security, at the gate of the actual flight, you go through another security. Right? There's extra protocol because of the terrorist stuff. It's a lot calmer now, right? But nonetheless, it's still there. And so they start looking at your passport. They open your bags and whatnot. And so I gave my passport to the guy, and the guy's Turkish. Right? He's an employee of the airport, and he starts speaking to me in Turkish. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Turkish. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, your name is Turkish. Right? My name is completely Turkish. Tariq Ata. Ata means father of. Ataturk. Ata, right?
Yeah.
And when I was there, I kept seeing my last name everywhere, on these stores, on these factories and whatnot. And I look Turkish. Now, I can pass for someone who looks Turkish. And, I told the guy, as I've told other Turks who speak English, the few that I met, that my father's side is Turkish. right? Now, my father's side is at least part Turkish. My great grandfather passed away in the Ottoman army, died with the Ottoman army in World War One, right? When he was in Russia. I know for a fact that some of my great grandparents, some of my great grandmothers are Turkish, 100% Turkish. My grandmother, my father's mother, is Turkish, 100% from Cyprus, right? The Turks of Cyprus. And my theory, Allahu Alam, is kind of what I'm imagining in my mind, that my father's side is actually Turkish. They're not Arab. And my great grandparents were part of the Ottoman army, and they were stationed in Palestine. And so when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, they just kind of stayed there. And this isn't kind of an isolated scenario. You know, my father told me of another guy he knows whose father was 100% Turkish with the army, right? And when the army was defeated in World War One, he was too embarrassed to go back to Turkey, so he stayed in Palestine. So you have that, right? And Palestine was run by, it was under Turkish, the Turkish government for several centuries, right? And so I tell him this, right? And it's meaningless. It was completely meaningless. You know, in the Arab world, what I'm accustomed to is, you know, oh, where you're from? I'm Palestinian. Oh, Palestinian. Wow, my wife's side is Palestinian. We're from Palestine, right? Or, you know, if you both are Palestinian, oh, where in Palestine? They're excited, right? They want to find some commonalities. Or if let's say in another part of the Arab world, you're from Palestine. Oh, Palestine. Oh, we love the Palestinian people and whatnot. And Turks love the Palestinian people, and just to be clear, right? But there's this effort to find a commonality and an interest. To try and say, oh yeah, there's some sort of connection between you and us, and therefore we're from the same place. We're from the same. With the Turkish people, it's like you don't speak a Turkish language, you're just not interesting, right?
Even if you're foreign, but you speak the language well, would you be more accepted?
I don't know. You know, I was there for 2 weeks, right? I'm not gonna sit there socially analyzing.
Gotta get Saeed.
The Turkish people and whatnot. But that's just experience I got. That's how they identify, right? Whereas in the Arab world, you can be from anywhere, right? You could be the whitest person in the world. If you speak Arabic, you're an Arab. It's literally how it is. I mean, it's one of the definitions of of an Arab, the one who speaks Arabic, right? Or else when you look at the Levant area, Syria and Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and in North Africa, they're not Arabs per se. I mean, the Arabs they originate in Yemen, and then they kind of spread within Arabia today. So the original Arabs are what's modern day Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the Emirates, and Qatar and Bahrain. Right? These are kind of the pure Arabs, but we're Arabs. We call ourselves Arabs and whatnot. People in Iraq consider themselves Arabs. In Egypt, they consider themselves Arabs. Moroccans consider themselves Arabs, right? Yeah. Why? Because they speak the Arabic language. And that's it. That's what it means to be an Arab, right? So just kind of slightly, we're just comparing and contrasting here, right? This is
kind of beautiful. It's like, doesn't matter what color your skin is.
Right?
We're Arab.
Experience is very valuable, so we're just sharing the experience and nothing more, nothing less.
Same thing in the Afghan world. It's like, we're from Afghanistan. Oh, which part? What's your tribe name? So even if you're like on the opposite sides, even if you're blonde hair, blue eyed, and I'm like the darkest Afghan, we're Afghan, we're brothers. That's it. It's almost
maybe the Turkish people are like that with each other, right? Again, I'm just kind of comparing and contrasting what I'm accustomed to versus what I saw. That's it.
So now I'm thinking, is that why from my experience, I found Palestinian people to be very fair skinned? Is that why? Because they intermix with like Turkish people?
I think it even goes before that, right? Before Islam, that was Roman land.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so I'm sure a lot of what we call Europeans today were living there, right? And so no doubt you had that, and then you also had Arabs who were living there, right? Pre-Islam. So no doubt they mixed, and that's why you find people of the Levant area
much darker
to be to be like they look European, blonde hair, green eyes, light skin, but they're Arab, right? So I think that's probably where it comes from.
The only tell I feel like you have for an Arab, if they look really white but they have curly hair, they're Arab.
I never noticed that.
Arabs usually have a lot of curly hair. I realized.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Europeans, I don't see much curly hair from like people that are European.
I never noticed.
That's why I was confused. I was like, if you guys are same Arab, I always wonder why is people from Qatar so much darker. I was like, oh, probably just because of the sun, but I guess there's more of a genetic reason to
No
it.
doubt. I mean, no doubt because of that. People in Yemen their skin color comes to like a reddish. It's interesting. I'm guessing that's just from the dirt. Kind of walking around those areas, the wind and the dirt kind of blows on you, maybe affected the skin. Allah Ta'ala on them.
But even then, there's always a limit. Like, you'll never become black in skin color. Then they will never think, oh, that person's African. There's always like a limit. So that's why I was always curious, like,
well,
why are they just, Levant is just so much more fair skinned than pure Arabs per se.
Right. I mean, maybe it has to do with the
melanin,
the weather, but the Levant isn't a lot cooler than Arabia. I mean, in the summer in Jordan, for example, the average summer day is around 92 degrees. I mean, yeah, it's a difference between that
Celsius?
And yeah, right. In Arabia, it'll be like 114, right? And there is a difference, but nonetheless, I mean, the sun is still pretty hot. And let's face it, I mean, I've been in Jordan and in rural areas where the Jordanian is like, if he was wandering in America, he would be seen as black, right? They had that skin color. Now, I don't know if his ancestors are from some African country or some African region who then migrated to this part of the world and they stay there. I don't know. Or if that's just how some of them are. But, you know, contrary to what we are accustomed to in America, Arab, non-Arab, it has nothing to do with skin color. Because you have Arabs who are as white as Europeans and as dark as people from,
Africa,
Ethiopia, right? And they're all considered Arabs. So Somalians are considered Arabs. People from African countries who speak Arabic are considered Arab, right? So, for example, Sudan, they would be seen here as black, but they speak Arabic. That's their language, and so we see them as Arabs. Right? And of course, you'll have some rivalry between certain countries, or you're not really Arab and whatnot. That's all nonsense, right? But that's how it is. So it's different than our experience.
That's interesting.
So look at, for example, what's his name? Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, he's South African, technically.
He's South African, right? Is he black?
No.
But if someone who's black from South Africa, what would he be considered here?
African American.
He'd be considered black.
Oh, yeah.
All right, African American, black.
Yeah.
They're the same country. Why is one white, one black, right? So in America, it's racialized by skin color.
So not by ethnicity or culture.
Not necessarily. Right? Maybe on like the census or something, you can write, hey, I'm actually this, right? But when people look at you, that's how it is.
But those censuses, I feel like they're never right, because I'm Afghan, so that means technically I'm Central Asian. I'm not Middle Eastern. But it's always like I have to pick between Asian or white, because there's no like.
Right.
So it's like, okay, what's the better chances of getting to the school?
I mean, I don't doubt that this is engineered in a way where certain results come about. I mean, politics is always shady.
It is. But now I'm thinking like, now before like, let's say I want to apply to university after college, inshallah. Now I'm gonna research. Okay, do they have more white people or Asian people? And I'll just pick the opposite. Better my chances, you know.
I mean, that's always possible, but
because like technically, what are you gonna say? I'm not white or I'm not Asian. Technically, I'm Asian. It's a continent of Asia. I guess I'm white because I'm Middle Eastern in the general.
And so, the question is, why ask that in the first place?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, what are they trying to get at?
When I applied to Saddleback, my college, that's the only place where I saw Afghan. I was mind blown. I was getting ready to pick white or Asian, just what I felt like that day, you know. But I looked, Central Asian. I was like, wow, click, and then it went even like closer, and Afghan was one of them. I was like,
so cool. For school, we understand because of affirmative action and whatnot, but why does the government need to know exactly what our ethnicity is? And when it comes to Latino, it's like they have their own specific box.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, are you Latino? No. Okay, go to the next box. It's like, okay, what's the deal, right?
Yeah, they always break Latinos even more.
Yeah.
And I wonder why. Because then you look back at history, and then you look at like stuff like the Tuskegee experiments and how messed up that was. And that was specifically targeted only to African Americans because, they're racist. So it's always like, should I put white just in case like a future experiment comes through?
You never know, man. You never know.
The government's shady.
Yes, Trump tried to add the question, are you an American citizen or not?
I could see Generally, I can see why that would make sense, but I feel like it'll be used for a malicious reason.
No, of
For
course.
them, yeah, of course.
Of course. To try and find, okay, right, where the non...
Kind of deport them.
Important, exactly,
Instead of
right?
being like, oh, okay.
And there was pushback, and alhamdulillah, it worked.
Alhamdulillah.
It worked. Well, back to Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's one lesson that I learned. Another lesson, I got a real glimpse of what the strategy of Kemal Atatürk, right? And one of the things I think he did to try and to solidify the secularism of the country was to turn anything that has to do with the Ottoman Empire into a tourist attraction. A tourist attraction. Okay, so I mean, what does that have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an image. Think of this, right? One of the masajid there that we visited is right on the Bosphorus, right? So you have a masjid, and literally when you're facing the Qibla, the windows are open. You see kind of the Bosphorus. It's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go there, and it's packed. Why? Because there are a bunch of restaurants, right? A bunch of tourist attractions there. And you have people, obviously not Muslim, let's say women, dressed in half tops and short skirts, like mini skirts.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking pictures around the masjid. Right? Just imagine that. They're taking pictures. Imagine seeing a lady in a mini skirt, half top, right? In front of a masjid, taking pictures with a masjid behind her. Right? And you're viewing this. Imagine growing up around this. What is the masjid? It takes away all of its sacredness, all of its sanctity. So all of this Islamic stuff, right, is made into what? Just an attraction. That's it. Something you go visit once. Oh, how nice. You post on social media. Of course, back then they didn't have social media, but you post on social media, I visited this place, and that's it. You just completely remove the glorification that is meant to occur in these areas. The glorification of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? The feeling of awe that you get when you enter the Masjid of Allah. So when you enter Hagia Sophia, when you entered it, alhamdulillah, now it's back into a masjid. Before that, Ataturk turned it into a museum, right? Why do you think that is? Do you think it was the goodwill of his heart that, this belongs to everyone? Because Hagia Sophia was kind of the accomplishment, the symbol of accomplishment of the Ottoman Empire, right? And that's why they established the capital there. Of course, it's strategic and whatnot, but it was a symbol of their success. It was a symbol of Islam for many centuries and a symbol of might for many centuries. Let's convert it into a museum. Everyone's walking in, whatever you wear, whatever, and you're just walking around, and it has no sanctity. Right? So when you see these things, of course, describing it is not like when you see it.
Mm-hmm.
When you see it, it's like, am I visiting a masjid? I mean, what am I visiting? I'm just visiting an old antique structure. That's it. And you go inside, and it's like you can't take it seriously anymore. You're not taking Salah seriously anymore, right? And that's how all of these Ottoman-built masajid have become, as a result of these mandates and whatnot. But alhamdulillah, I mean, it seems like the government has caught on to that. Maybe I'm just analyzing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And now the newer masajid that they're building, the current government is building, has changed its the architecture. So all of the Ottoman masajid are pretty much the same exact architecture, the same exact model. It's just how big it is or how small it is. That's it. And the only other difference is the colors. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're entering the same exact masjid, and the only difference is size or the colors. That's it.
It's like an iPhone.
Yeah. It's in the end, it's the same thing. But the newer masajid, they've left that. So now you actually feel like you're entering a masjid.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just entering some sort of old antique Ottoman museum.
You get your Friday permit and
right, and whatnot. So that was refreshing. So we entered when we were there, we were in Taksim Square, and just the newest masjid, huge one, was recently opened. And I went in, and it was really refreshing. Why? Because I went in, and again, I'm on observe mode. I'm trying to take in all the information I can.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I want my money's worth. And so I'm looking around, and as soon as I enter the musalla, as soon as I enter the masjid and then into the musalla, do you know what came to my mind? I'm like, this feels like an American masjid. It feels like how we here in America build our masajid. Even the colors are quite similar, the earthy type colors. The Ottoman masajid are very, the colors tend to be more brighter and more the warmer colors, like blue and I guess whatever, these bluish, which is really nice. I mean, blue was the seems like it was the Ottoman color, my favorite color personally. But here it's like the earth colors, the brown and the light yellow and these things, and how they structured it's more than just a musalla. It's more like a community center, right? And so it gave me that feel like, wow, I feel like I'm in a masjid in America, a well-established masjid in America. And so that was really nice. That was really refreshing. Alhamdulillah.
That's very interesting you say, because I'm guessing Ataturk wanted it to be more European-centric, right? Eurocentric.
Maybe. I mean, everyone back then was trying to be Eurocentric. Right? They thought that, we've been defeated. These guys are more powerful than us. That means we need to be like them. And that's very, very common for all human societies. The defeated tries to emulate the defeater.
Because that's interesting, because I remember even like recently when Trump went to the Vatican, his wife had hijab on in the Vatican. His wife had a hijab on in the Vatican this is it's a place of religion. Even president's wife, have to be covered. But then like you would go back and think like even back then Ataturk, he didn't like see that. He's like, oh, but I guess goals are different.
Right. So now when these tourists enter the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia and these other mosques, I mean, they say that the women need to be wearing proper attire. Even the men, right? Men can't be going in short shorts and whatnot, or thigh.
The Cali clothes.
Thigh, yeah, like and whatnot. And they for the bigger masajid, the bigger tourist attraction, Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, they actually enforce it. They have security actually telling people you have to wear this, and they have the items for people to wear, so that they go in. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's new or that was happening even before the current administration or whatnot, but yeah, Islam is reviving in that area.
Alhamdulillah.
Right? Alhamdulillah. That's how I feel. That's how I felt, and that's something we're very proud of.
Alhamdulillah. I feel like it's almost interesting. Islam, you know how we always go, oh, Islam, golden ages, and then Omar Ashwari came on the 6th episode or 5th episode, I believe, and he's saying if Islam had a dark age, it'd be right now. I feel as though like right now, the time we're living, it's almost as a tipping point where it's going back in the other direction, where Islam was so far in the laws, but like I feel now it's really
undoubtedly
reviving,
right?
And coming
undoubtedly.
back up.
So Islam has had more than one golden age. You have the ultimate golden age, and that was the age of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? No, it wasn't the most technologically sophisticated. It wasn't the most politically developed, but the people were the most developed. So it was a golden age of Iman and sincerity, and people with a mission, with an aim. I mean, it's truly humbling when you read these people's stories, how dedicated they were to the religion and the development of the religion. That was one golden age. The second golden age was that during the early Abbasid era. But here was a golden age of information. So there was a lot of scholastic institutions, both Islamic and secular, for those studying the sciences and whatnot. Economically, it was extremely well-to-do. In fact, one economic historian of economics, in a book called Debts, 500 Years of something, I forgot what it's called. The Abbasid, that era, the time of the Abbasid dynasty, is rated as one of, or the most, I forgot, having the one of the most or the highest average income.
Really?
In human history, or like 5,000 years of human history. Yeah, really well-to-do, right? So that was definitely another golden age. There wasn't really any internal fighting. There wasn't any major problems and whatnot. And then after that, they slowly fell into a very dark age. The 7th and 8th century Hijri, the Hijri calendar, which is around the 12th and the 13th and the 14th centuries of Gregorian. A very dark time. So the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, time of Ibn Kathir, Ibn Qayyim. Ibn Qayyim, once he comes on the scene, that's when they start recovering. But nonetheless, he's kind of living the aftermath of what happened. Um, so Ibn Taymiyyah is there, and whatnot. So he actually had some really, really major scholars where most of our scholarship today go back to them, to that era. It's really interesting. So you had that dark age, and you can make an argument that that time was actually worse than now. It was worse than now. Politically, it was more divided.
Mm-hmm.
So you had smaller regions than you have countries today, and you had more. The economic situation was terrible, absolutely terrible. It said that during that time in Egypt, people were eating dogs because they were starving. Egypt is really bad right now. And by the way, if you want to help a people, help the people of Egypt. Right? Especially if you know Egyptian people who can send money directly to these families, they are in need. But I don't know that people today are eating dogs. I know that some people are literally living in graveyards. They're homeless, have nothing to eat. It's really bad, right? But I mean, they were eating dogs. Now, when it comes to scholarship, they were better to do. That first dark age is better than our current dark age, if you want to call it that. We have less scholars, less quality of scholarship than they had. But politically and even economically, politically, we're definitely not worse to do. Yeah, the Arab world has some really bad leaders, but outside of the Arab world, you have some pretty good countries. Malaysia's doing well. I think Indonesia's doing at least decent. Singapore, although
Singapore's Muslim?
so the government is Muslim, Brunei, these areas, but it's not. It's kind of a very, very mixed population. But nonetheless, they're Muslim
They're doing
government,
well.
right?
Singapore's doing well.
They're doing really well, right? They're very wealthy out there. Pakistan is doing well politically. Turkey is doing very well politically, and whatnot. Of course, there are challenges, there are concerns. I'm not trying to endorse anyone or to say, that's not my idea
but
here.
Generally,
But
just
generally speaking, right?
they're in a war zone right now.
Right.
Yeah.
There's some amount of stability and some amount of stability politically and economically. Right. It might not be the most comfortable place to live.
It might not be Switzerland, but
right. There's still some hope. Right. There still seems to be some progress. There are some Muslim countries that are going up. Right. And really, the main problems is the Arab world, or at least parts of the Arab world. Arabia, with the exception of Yemen, is doing really well, right, for themselves. Sure, their foreign policies are terrible, and criticize their governments as much as you want. That's not the point I'm making. All I'm saying is that there are some areas that are doing really bad, and some areas that are doing fine for themselves. Right. So I think it's politically more stable. Now, when it comes to economically, I think it's economically more stable, generally speaking. But in terms of scholarship, no, I think there's that first dark age was more scholastically better to do. Now, I do think we're going up. We are going up. We are going up. It's only a matter of time where this dictatorship stuff kind of subsides. People are getting tired, right? But with the Western world's grip over the Middle East kind of loosening, voluntarily they chose to kind of move on and go to somewhere else, or because the West is weakening. I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm not here to make either argument, but that's the fact of the matter. And now with the development of Muslims in the West, specifically North America and the UK, I think they're soon going to have a lot to offer the Muslim world. And I think that's exciting. That's very optimistic.
Very.
So, alhamdulillah.
It's almost interesting. It's like even in France, like France has a lot of Islamophobia, a lot of problems with that. But I remember reading somewhere about, like, I don't know if it was 2050 or 2100 or something along those lines, right? Yes, a lot of years, but even so, they said the population of Muslims in France will outdo the population of the French that are not Muslim.
So, I mean, that's why they're going all crazy, right? Yeah. 10% of France is Muslim. 10% of France is Muslim. However, we have to ask the question, how many of those Muslims actually care about their Islam? A lot of these Muslims they're seculars, right? I mean, some of the most inappropriate French movies were directed by someone whose name is Abdul Karim or Abdul something, right? So a lot of these Muslims in Europe, I mean, with the exception of the UK, I mean, they're not strong to do iman-wise, nor are there many institutions, right? What's going for us here in America, And of course, that's because we have the freedoms, maybe more than what our brothers and sisters in Europe have.
Alhamdulillah.
Again, with the exception of the UK, is that we built institutions here. The masjid is an institution that's been being built for 30, 40 years now. You have other institutions that are being built. You have Muslim civil rights institutions. I mean, this has gone a long way for us, right? And whenever we're attacked, these institutions serve as a shield for us. I mean, let's face it, back in the whole Trump stuff, if it wasn't for our Muslim organizations, institutions, the results may have been very different, right? So, alhamdulillah for that, and that's another thing. And we Muslims in America are rising, and that's exciting for us.
Can't wait till the day. Let's say I go to a beach and I just see other people praying. I'm like, it's not just
where?
me anymore.
You go where?
Like I'm going to the beach or something. Like let's say I want to bodyboard or surf or whatever activity. Or I'm out at the spectrum. I see somebody else praying in the corner. I'm like, let's go. It's not just me anymore.
Well, I mean, the thing in California is that there isn't really a concentration of Muslims in a particular area. It's not like Chicago or maybe New York or Detroit where there's a concentration of Muslims where everywhere you go you see hijabi women and Muslim men walking around, right? But alhamdulillah, California does have a lot of other advantages. I mean, I think in comparison to our brothers and sisters in the East Coast, there's a lot of very well developed institutions here beyond the masjid institution. The masajid over there are a lot bigger, a lot more developed. Why? Because kind of the community and whatnot. But over here you have other institutions that are really well developed, that are important for our experience. And so it's just about working together with our brothers and sisters across the nation in order to bring the best.
True. Well, I think that's a good place to end off. Talked about a lot. Thank you, Sheikh Tariq. Assalamu alaikum.